And that's all like something that you could put into a real journalistic article and have it, Twitch doesn't have anything that they can say against that. They can't even mock it back. They're just like, oh, that's actually the situation we're putting people in. and and that makes us look really, really bad. Calling things what they aren't seems to me to be a very common behavior of individuals or groups who are trying to shirk their responsibility, and it's more common than you might think. Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about something current events, but it got me thinking a little bit. And hopefully, some of this is going to be a little bit obvious, but hopefully I'll get to some conclusions that you'll actually find interesting. So just to make sure you're up to speed, last week there's a streaming platform called Twitch that had an in-person convention that was called TwitchCon. Of course, it was held in San Diego, a disarmed hellhole. But there was a prominent streamer who goes by the name Emiru who was assaulted at that convention. A man walked up and basically cut past all of the security tape and basically assaulted her. It's on camera that we see an assault happening. So security, or what they call security, basically just let the assailant go. And now, the question is whether this person that they see leaving the convention several minutes later is the same person or not. Everything becomes much more complex when you actually have someone red-handed and let them go, and then you need to figure things out afterwards. And, that would be bad enough, but it actually turns out that Emiru herself had employed her own private security previously, and they had been forbidden from entering the convention grounds. So not only was the security there not security, but also they were preventing you from having your own security if you found their observers to be insufficient security. This made me think about the nature of calling things like this security, right? If you just have a guy who's there to observe, right? Who's there to say, oh, I saw it, I'm a witness. But they have no no ability or orders to actually prevent or stop a crime in progress. That this isn't really security, right? These are observers in the best case, right? These are nobody in the best case, observers in the medium case, and in the worst case, they're basically pallbearers, right? I mean, unless they're armed, or unless they're very, very numerous, they're not really security by any meaningful sense of the word. And even though San Diego is a, disarmament hellhole, you can still actually hire security guards if you have a thing going on. But of course, Twitch doesn't want to spend the money to do that because real security guards are more expensive. So the question I asked myself, and this is something that I think is pretty obvious, is why do we let them get away with calling it security? Well, a lot of the time people do not, right? There's a very strong and reasonable temptation to mock these morons for what they're doing, right? We have the phenomenon of calling a gun-free zone a criminal empowerment zone or something like that. People do this, right? This is funny and fun and valuable. Mocking stupid people for doing stupid things is always worth doing. But it makes a jump that these people are also not willing to kind of concede, right? Therefore, it's less effective on them, and it doesn't actually solve the problem if there is a possible way to solve the problem. Twitch is a far-left company already, and they probably don't actually care about their people as individuals because they're not individualists. But if you just say things in a non-mocking way, it can actually have more or stronger legal ramifications for the group. If they say, oh yeah, we have security, the question that a person should ask is, oh, how is your security enforced? Or if you have a gun-free zone, oh, how is your gun-free zone enforced? Oh, it's an honor system. Oh, okay. So an unenforced gun-free zone, right? Or, oh yeah, we have security. Oh yeah, what are they? How are they armed? What security company did you hire them from? Oh no, they're unarmed volunteers. Oh, so you have unarmed observers and not security. And, people could go around and publicize this using the more accurate terminology without actually mocking them. And that might get them to actually maybe see the light in some sense, if only for legal liability purposes. I mean, as I thought about this more, I realized, and again, I still feel like this is pretty obvious, but as I thought about this more, I said to myself, well, this is something that groups or people do to avoid responsibility. People will call things what they wished they were rather than what they actually are. And this is something that individuals do, this is something that states do, this is something that even corporations do, because if you can convince people that you don't have legal liability for X, Y, and Z, well, that saves you a lot of money in the long run. And there are tons of examples that you can think of, like free healthcare. Well, it's not actually free. The doctors get paid money. Oh, okay, well, where do they get that money? Well, they either take it from you in taxes or they print it. And printing it also is the same as taking it from you in taxes, just it takes it from a slightly different group of people. We have unarmed security, right? That's not, unless there's 100 guys that can dogpile someone before they get to you, or unless they're armed with, knife, taser, gun, something, they're not really security. They're just observers. They're there to be witnesses for some hypothetical, legal case sometime in the future. And even then, they're probably not that reliable for that either. But then we have stuff that the state uses, like, state education. Well, okay, yeah, education is one thing, but when you let the state have education, what it rapidly turns into is indoctrination in favor of the state. We have things like civic duties. Well, if someone is enslaving you, you don't actually have any real duties to the person enslaving you. You have the freedom and even, I would say, the moral right to resist. But, if you go to your 10th grade civics class, they'll say, oh, you have civic duties. And these duties are based on you, living here, which is a really, really bad argument for a variety of reasons that we won't get into now. I mean, if we, mocking them, of course, is important and good. So don't stop mocking. Never stop mocking stupid people. But if there were a group of people that went and decided to simply start publicizing these events as they were, or these policies as they were, it might actually have an effect, right? If Twitch is saying security, 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 and everybody else is saying, oh yeah, observers, unarmed observers kind of thing, not, unlicensed, unpaid, unlicensed, unpaid professionals posing as security. If they used, in addition to the mocking, if you also had more carefully chosen legal terminology, you might end up with something where, like, Twitch says, oh, if we keep saying security and it becomes clear that this is not security, we might actually have some legal liability here. Because everybody can see that this isn't security. And in fact, even the people who, are similarly situated on the political spectrum as Twitch themselves might say, this is starting to look kind of bad. Everybody is saying that we have these unenforced weapons-free zones, or like honor system crime-free zones, kind of thing. And because it's not mocking us, other people who are on the same side as us are kind of getting convinced by it, and to at least some degree. Instead of saying that Twitch security apprehended the individual, or saying that Twitch will have security on site, you would say, instead of security, Twitch employed observers with no orders to stop or prevent assaults or crimes. That's true. There's no mocking in that. And that's all like something that you could put into a real journalistic article and have it, Twitch doesn't have anything that they can say against that. They can't even mock it back. They're just like, oh, that's actually the situation we're putting people in. and that makes us look really, really bad. Similarly, you could say, oh yeah, this particular mall is an unenforced weapons-free zone. It is honor system only. Well, you can't. How do you turn that around to make yourself look good as the mall in that case? And this made me think a little bit further, and hopefully here is where something interesting will come out. But it made me think about moving from high trust to low trust societies. We've seen societies move in the opposite direction, from low trust to high trust. This is a very common thing that's just a civilizational aspect, right? In a low trust society where there's never been high trust, right? You have a widespread armed public, and everybody knows that the reasoning for that is totally rational. You know, and what happens is that as the people are armed and are able to protect themselves, you gradually move from low trust and you kind of step your way up to high trust. And of course, there are plenty of ways that governments or whatever can kind of arrest this progress. But the idea would be that, like, hey, you know, every time somebody tries to steal from someone, they get shot. Eventually, the people will stop, will reduce the amount of, or at least the circumstances which they feel like they can, you know, steal from people. And so this is the trust level of society goes up gradually. And eventually, you know, if you're very, very lucky and nothing else stops this process from happening, trust gets so high that people kind of voluntarily self-disarm themselves. They're like, well, you know, this thing weighs, you know, 3 pounds, and it's a big old chunky thing on my waist, and, you know, I haven't ever needed it. I haven't even ever gotten close to needing it in the last 10 years or in my whole life, and maybe I'll just set it at home for today. And what used to be a habit becomes a habit in the other direction, right? People are like, well, you know, I don't need to be armed. Why would I need to be armed? Everything is fine. Then the thing that seems to happen frequently is that disarmament becomes mandatory. People say, oh, I'm afraid now when I see someone who is armed. That's so out of the ordinary that it actually scares me. And this is a first big sign that trust is going to be falling again. Because what happens when you forcibly disarm people is that, yeah, the people who wish to remain on the good side of the law stay disarmed for the most part. There may be occasional civil disobedience on that, but you know that is what it is. But the people who don't want to stay on the good side of the law, they don't care nearly as much. They, you know, when they're on the job, so to speak, they'll be armed because it gives them the ability to overpower the person that they're trying to steal from or whatever. And so what you have is this small criminal class, and the criminal class was moved to a very small group by way of the things that moved from low trust to high trust originally, right, in the past. And so there's this very small group of criminals. But then they start preying on people, and they find out that they don't really have any repercussions, or at least the repercussions are so uncommon that they're like, oh, this is actually a profitable way to make a living. And you know, Jimmy got pinched, but you know, there's 300 of us, and 1 out of 300 isn't a really big number. And so what happens is that, of course, the criminal class grows. And of course, the mandatory disarmament of the law-abiding people remains in force because we're moving to lower trust. And of course, the government is now not interested in the actual safety of its law-abiding citizens. It's more interested in fleecing them in the forms of taxation, regulation, eminent domain, whatever. And so what happens is that this criminal class grows as trust continues to fall. And at some point, even the police themselves might become untrustworthy at that point, right? We have cities in the US today where the police are in favor of people loitering on the street, selling counterfeit goods, assaulting people with cameras or without cameras. And they say, well, we have to allow this property crime to happen because it is our, like, cultural duty or something like that. I'm not quite sure how they would justify that, but that is what they do, right? And so, I don't know. It just seems like of course, again, not trying to tell people to not mock this kind of nonsense, but at the same time, people who are, let's say, you know, on the kind of legitimate journalist edge of that spectrum, right? People who aren't just, you know, meme lords or whatever. It might make sense for them to actually start calling out some of these policies or behaviors or habits or tendencies in words that don't actually involve any mockery. Just say what it is, and let the pure, unvarnished language simply create, if not a shaming effect, at least the suggestion of perhaps some legal liability. I don't know. It just seems weird to me that we're in this situation now where being disarmed is so normal that defending oneself. I mean, it's been a long time, and we've seen like actual property defense rights withering away for a long time, right? In a system, in the state of nature, let's call it, right? In a state where there's no significant organized government of any kind. If someone goes onto your property, breaks into your house and steals a thing, and you shoot that person, right? That person, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a lot of social pushback, and realistically, you shouldn't get any like legal pushback because there's no system to legally what's the word, like censure you for defending your property. When people get into a situation where they're trying to build a society together, they might voluntarily, in the best case, right? In the best case, they might voluntarily say, okay, we now have a system that is, let's say it's 90% effective, right? It's some kind of, security system that's 90% effective. And at this point, I feel like there is a good enough chance that I will get my stolen goods back or restitution for them, after someone steals from me, that I am willing to give up some of that freedom, right? I can't shoot a retreating thief would be the example, right? Okay, you can, it might be unwise to, but you could, if you decide, if the odds of you getting restitution by letting that thief go were good enough, you could agree to not shoot thieves in the back. Fair enough. The problem, of course, is that as the government grows, as it becomes more oppressive rather than more servile, you end up with people who you end up with this success rate dropping, right? And the success rate can drop for one of two reasons. One, it can be that thieves get smarter, which there's not much that the government can do about that other than to keep ratcheting things up. But number two would be that the government starts saying, oh, it's just property crime and you should really have insurance for that. Well, the whole purpose of having the system for, security, for, the public security system at all, is to make it so that this kind of behavior is discouraged. If you no longer discourage the behavior, you're actually, you're demanding something of the insurance companies that they were not originally planning to deal with. And you're also breaking your agreement with the people who agreed to give up the freedom to shoot retreating thieves because you're so good at catching them and extracting back, the goods to the victim. When you give up that that part of the game, and you just say, oh yeah, we're not going to bother with thieves anymore, then those people absolutely have the freedom to say, oh, okay, cool, then I'm not going to use your security services anymore, and I'm going to revert back to the state where I can shoot thieves in the back. And if you tell them that, no, you can't do that, you're here under my security for life, even when I don't provide security, then you can't really complain when you get pushback, whether that pushback be vocal or otherwise. So, I don't know. It's just funny because, I feel like no one takes this bird's eye view of like, oh, yeah, property rights. Okay, property rights are important. Well, okay, but at the same time, we want, how do I put this? Proportionality is a luxury in the punishment sense, right? If the thief is just going to get away and you have a 0% chance of ever catching him, then you may as well shoot him in the back. Because, he has no more right to take that stuff from you than he would have to enslave you for the number of hours to make the money that would require to purchase the TV. You would have just as much right for self-defensive violence in that case as well. The reason that people give up these freedoms, the freedom to shoot a retreating thief in the back, is because, number one, they expect that the system the justice system is going to get their stuff back, right? At least a reasonable percentage of the time. It might not be 90%, but you can see that there's a spectrum of possibilities here that you can think about. But what happens eventually is that the government, because the government is a coercive body, says, oh, you're stuck with me, so I actually don't have to serve your purposes anymore. There's nothing you can do if I decide not to. And so the government says, oh, it's just, they make excuses, but the bottom line is that, oh yeah, we used to defend your property and now we don't, but you still have to pay us for defending your property even if we don't. And that just makes things, that's not where things end, right? That's just kind of like one of the first, steps in the giant staircase that you're falling down. Eventually it becomes, oh, you can't defend yourself from physical assaults because, again, there's the proportionality thing. And again, proportionality is a luxury. When you have a system that punishes people for assaulting others, then you say, okay, yes, this guy did punch you, but punching is too strong. Let's say you just tapped someone in the chest, right? Single finger, boop, right? You boop someone. In a state of nature, you could say, you assaulted me, and I'm going to use force to, stop the threat. And again, there's no system that can say, oh yeah, you did wrong by shooting that guy who booped you in the chest. But eventually what you do is you say, okay, let's have some kind of proportionality. Yes, he booped you in the chest. So yes, we're going to get you some restitution for that. And no, if you do pull a gun and shoot the guy who boops you in the chest, who is clearly unarmed, then you're going to also face repercussions because, we want to make sure that there are situations where, you just claim that he booped you in the chest and you shot him, but really you just shot him. We need to avoid that outcome as well. And so there's all these trade-offs that happen, and they could happen voluntarily, but usually they don't. Usually a state comes up and says, here's the rules, now you have to obey the rules, and what ends up happening is that they justify their authority on the basis that they will protect and provide restitution, and then they gradually get away from restitution, and then they gradually get away from protection itself. They just become a protection racket where they don't protect you, but if you don't pay them, they will damage you. I don't know. The elimination of the rights to defend private property are one step on the path to the elimination of private property itself. And the elimination of private property, or the elimination of the defense of private property, is also a step on the path to the elimination of defense of just yourself. And then the elimination of the defense of self. And then the end point is basically that, you are the subject of what is effectively a slaveholder. I don't know. This is, I realize that I'm probably going too bird's eye on this, but it is interesting to see how these kinds of little word games, oh, it's security. Well, no, it's not. It's not security. They're unarmed observers without any authority to stop assailants or criminals. Oh, well, we're going to call that security. Well, now you're calling something by a name that it is not, and that has, legal and cultural ramifications over a long period of time. I don't know. Anyway, just the thoughts I had about this and how it kind of signifies the overall downfall of individual rights, and it feels important to me. So, figured I'd talk about it a bit. Something I'm working on, I've been doing a lot of book critiques, and I don't want to just be a critique thing, or a critique channel. So the thing I'm working on right now, and working on is probably too strong of a word, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to lay down some of the, and I mean in future videos, what I'm going to try to do is lay down some of the kind of base aspects of the classical liberal vision of the state, and show what voluntary alternatives there are to them, if any, and also make a case that all of them are based on one particular let's say power that most states or almost all states, if not all states, assert for themselves. And so I want to talk about taxation, conscription, yada, yada, yada. But we're going to get to a pillar that I think is very important. And so I'm going to kind of work my way to that. That's kind of the plan, so that I don't just become like a book. I mean, doing critiques of books is one thing, but also one of the problems that people have, right, is that some people just critical theory, right? You just critique things without offering any like positive alternatives or options or even any original thought. You just say, oh, this is stupid because this is a fallacy, and then blah, 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 blah. I'm going to try to put down a few ideas that I think are positive and help us move toward a more voluntary future, you know, if people actually adopt them. But anyway, that's what I got for today. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you found this interesting. If you like the channel, like what I'm doing, you know what to do, and I will see you next time. Have a good rest of your week.